Hey folks, welcome to Defining Talent, Startup Superheroes, the podcast, where we talk all things identifying, defining talent when we think of how do we build the best teams that we can. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Lauren, who I met recently at Silicon Slopes in Utah, and could not get over how we had this dual obsession around the topic of like identifying and defining talent and the qualities that make teams really amazing. Also, she has an incredible background. So Lauren, welcome to the show. I'm so honored to have you. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Of course. First of all, thank you so much for having me. As you mentioned when we first met, just the synergy and I think the enthusiasm and the excitement around our conversation was really special. And so thank you for inviting me and bringing me on board. My name is Lauren, and I am currently, you'll see if you're watching this, you'll see the subheader under my name, which is Product, People, and Performance Leader. I am constantly iterating and evolving my subtitle, I guess I would say, and that's how I'm positioning myself for this conversation, because I'm really at the intersection of people and product. And so I'm a product leader, but I really focus on people, human problems. I think a lot of product leaders do, but mine is specifically related to people's performance or people's growth. And so I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of different startups, launched a couple of different products really in the personal development space, whether it was for Gen Z or whether it was for advanced professionals. And so this, I think this thread around people and performance in digital products is something that's really special and unique to me, and excited to talk to you a little bit more about that.
Yeah, totally. And you've seen it from all the different angles, right? And at the end of the day, we build products to support people, and people build products to support people. So it's not surprising that you're finding kind of this like intense intersectionality in that work that you're doing. And I love that lens that you bring. Well, we always kick off our show asking, like, when did you start thinking about talent and team building as part of your career?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say from day one. And this is also something, a lot of folks talk about their personal life or their professional life or their career as these really distinct experiences. And I'm a big fan of talking about your personal and professional journey and the potential intersection. Yes, that can cause problems. Yes, we need to have boundaries, et cetera, et cetera. But I really do put my all into my work. And so from day one, teaching, learning, and development is really at the core of who I am. I am the oldest of 4 kids. And so I've always been thinking about teams and skills and how we're going to configure something and get something done. I'm also the daughter of a lifelong educator and have always been sort of socialized to think about people's development and growth plans. And the tech products I've worked on, as I mentioned, have always been about personal performance, personal development, and comes from a background in learning and development. So really from day one, I talk a lot about and think a lot about high performance teams. I raise a family. I have kids, and my husband's actually a coach of high performing teams. And so it's a big part of our conversation at home, in my personal life, in my professional life. And something really interesting, I think, as I approach kind of social interaction also, like, what is the value here? What is my value? How are we kind of bringing something together? What is the unique talent that either of us brings so that we can make something really unique and special together?
Yeah, and I think it's that specialness, right? That magic is the place that I like to spend a lot of my time thinking. So a very savvy viewer might have noticed that there's a little basketball tucked into the Defining Talent logo for this podcast. And that's because in addition to startup teams, I really love the look at team building through the sports lens as well. So you mentioned kind of coaching, and whether that be professional coaching or looking at teams, it's kind of like, how do we put this group, the right group of people together to have it be a sum that is to end up with an equation or a number that is greater than the sum of its parts separately. So I think that that's kind of like where that specialness, right? That magic comes in, because if we're going to innovate and build something that's never been built before, we can't just kind of like throw some robots at it. We should probably have some really brilliant people coding those robots to do a little bit of the work, right? But like, we need to have that like magic come into play here. So Some of the conversations that you and I really like centered on were around this new project you're doing kind of at that intersection of people, product, and performance, especially looking at like, what are these qualities that actually makes a high performing team? Not even looking backwards, but looking forwards, right? Especially looking at like, if we just do what we've always done, we're probably not going to have very equitable teams, especially looking at gender, especially looking at race, looking at like class representation across the tech industry. So yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what's that project that you're working on?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background because it connects to this thread of high-performing teams and basketball. So follow me here. Not too long, well, this is maybe a year ago, actually. I was working on a project. We had to, I had the opportunity to design, build a strategy, and also launch a product from the ground up. It was a layer to an existing product, which was in the SaaS space, and it was expected to give people an experience to learn a little bit about the skills they might need to be really effective salespeople, while not coming off as a course or teachery or something that they had to learn, because these were adults that were doing their sales as a side hustle. Nobody wants to be told that they have to then attend this class to learn something.
Yeah, that's like a really fine line that you needed to thread a needle there.
It was challenging and very exciting, and very, very pleased to share that I was able to, after the research and design and really laying a foundation around user experience research, we were able to onboard a team of engineers and execute on delivering an MVP in less than 3 months. It is one of my proudest accomplishments. It was so badass. And that team that worked together, we often called ourselves the dream team. And the dream team, in reference to basketball, let me ask you, might be like, what's your favorite like high performing dream team in basketball?
I mean, when I think of that in terms of like team building, like intentionally building, I think of UConn, the UConn Huskies women's basketball program, right? How Gino has just like built this every year. They're able to bring in the right people, and it's not necessarily just bringing in the top talent around the country. It's bringing in the top talent that fits within the system and fits together well. That like there's a lot of strategy involved there. Obviously, then you bring back the dream team to the Olympic team as well.
That's right. So you just nailed a couple of principles around this project that I'm working on now. Flash forward to today. I am actually working with the company that I was the client for. It turns out we had to hire an external engineering team, a really highly skilled firm that was able to help us execute. And this team of talent had to be super skilled, be able to ramp up really quickly, be able to synergize and work together with the requirements and nuance in a very tailored, like client-driven way. Most contexts of product development are very focused on building up an awareness of one brand, one identity, one company. And the nuance in this in this situation was we were working with a client-facing agency and myself at the time, who was the client, right, to deliver something together, which is a really unique way of thinking about a dream team, right?
Yeah.
What you just like described in UConn, for example, which is like this constant development of an iteration of exceptionally skilled individuals who perform really well together and can be cherry picked to then lead an example at the highest level. So with it, whether it's like, for the Olympics, or let's even think like, at the professional level. So whether it's like NBA or WNBA, right? Like some of those really popular teams too, that are winning championships over and over. Well, now I have the luxury to actually work with that client-facing agency. And so the problem to solve is, how do we keep this level of autonomous, self-directed, high-performing excellence while constantly delivering to clients, right? And so it's not about training this team to think about their brand identity, but instead to think about our collective brand identity and the ways that we want to showcase those skills in very flexible, adaptable ways that still resonate with clients who need a high-performing team, right? So when you're average software engineering challenge wants to look at offshore, cheap, and fast. How do you balance that with what might seem like a really pricey tag, right? Like sticker shock.
But the outcome is going to be
communicate the outcome. Exactly. So that's the people project that I'm working on. And it's actually productizing an entire strategy to help us identify not only skills and roadmaps and pathways for these exceptionally talented individuals, but also then to build this framework of continued growth and development, which when you think of your highest performers, right, your seniors in a traditional organization, you kind of write them off like, they've got it. Now let's work on building everybody else, right? Yeah. Or you have this assumption of the senior then moving into people leader roles. And that's not at all what we have here. So it's really thinking differently about what senior means, about what learning development means, about what growth plans and constant evolution means for some of the top talent in the business.
Yeah, I love that. I learned so many things from the book Radical Candor. I love having books that I can pull up. Definitely a reader. Yes. Kim Scott really drives home that concept of having these two paths, right? Of your people leaders, but also like that rock star path. And then the other thing that she really called out that has changed my view as a manager is saying like, why are we spending more time often with our lower performing teammates instead of our higher performing teammates? The ceiling is so much higher that with some attention, love, and like strategic management that someone can get to. So that I think that's like another frame of reference that I kind of bring to this conversation. So I love that this is the work you're doing. Looks like you got a book too. That might be relevant.
I do, since we're sharing. So this one is called The Empathy Advantage. And it's also about leadership. It's also about thinking differently of the role of leadership. So not just people leaders, but the executives in an organization. I think you would really appreciate this from a like strategy perspective. And some of the golden nuggets out of this book are that when you really lead with empathy and when you're thinking about people as people, not as like cogs in your, business, but people, some really incredible things for high performance can evolve, right? And really thinking also about your values of leadership and how that influences and frames then skills development, skills mapping, performance reviews, performance conversations, right? Performance and growth, and some really subtle but important shifts in some of the language that we use.
Yeah. Oh my God. I'm so excited to get into this. So I spoke recently on one of our episodes with Matt Vallone, and he talked about, he's like, yeah, I want problem solvers, but not problem solvers that solve one problem solvers that solve the problem of solving a lot of problems. And it feels like you're kind of getting into this here, but we approach that from a hiring perspective. And, that's so much the work that I do at Hustle Hunters is we're all about like, let's build the team and kind of hope that we've done enough diligence that this team is going to have the right framework to like help this talent thrive and like they're really going to grow together. And I'm so excited to dig in with you today around what's next, right? Okay, great. We built this kick-ass high performing team. Now what? Where do we go from here? So you're a product person. I assume there was a great deal of research involved, but I'm kind of curious, like, how did you lay the framework and scope for what this project entailed?
So I'm going to reflect on like the typical way that things are done, right? That I have experienced. Maybe it's not what's typical for everyone, but it's what I have experienced. And usually there's an HR function. If there's not an HR function, then you get a lot of leaders who are putting on an HR hat and pull together all of their job descriptions. And they cherry pick from those job descriptions and work backwards to then identify the skills that are needed and create some sort of framework. You got to start somewhere, right? Okay, that works. Then you typically jump to an existing software solution so that you can capture all of that, manage it, and then you're off to the races and you've got your performance management good to go. One of the problems with that is that most software solutions are businesses and they are designed to scale. They are designed to help many companies with many different problems scale at a super fast rate. And once you have put this is that investment hypothesis. Once you have invested in putting everything in, it becomes very challenging to either take that out and put it elsewhere or to think differently about it. So what we did at Codingscape was the exact opposite. It was a no code solution. It was a no software solution. And this was literally from scratch, which feels painful for some folks. But I'm very happy to report that our engineers, knowing the effort and energy it takes to even start and tinker, really appreciated that investment in them, in exploring what is meaningful and valuable to you. What have you experienced in the past around performance management, around growth strategies? Where in your other experiences did folks get this right or wrong? And we got some really great insights and some really great conversations to kickstart with a very distributed team. We also went to our leaders and really thought through, okay, what are the critical domains that distinguish this as a business, right? Apart from the typical tech skills that you will find all over the internet that everyone is hiring for. If everyone's hiring for them and everyone has them, what's going to make us special?
And communication is that one for me. I'm like, I've never seen a job description that doesn't say you need to be a good communicator. So does that mean everyone who's ever gotten a job is a great communicator? Like now it means nothing.
And to your point right there, how do we operationalize it? What does communication mean in this context, yes, in that role for that project? And how could we start to, this is the space that I love, like get really messy with all of these insights and then start to curate them and come together with an MVP, right? How do we now take the nuance there and without getting overwhelmed with all the details, start to make something meaningful and make some progress with this? So yeah, user experience research. What are these domains that really set us as a business apart and distinguish us? And then what's really important to our team members? And not surprisingly, these are the uniquely human skills, right? These are the nuance of applying technical skills and getting some of those definitions. Like, what does it mean to know a coding language, but be able to execute on and use that coding language in a nuanced way with exceptional skill in the context that we have, right? And another really favorite is adaptability. I shared with you the title of this one, which was The Empathy Advantage. Yeah. Heather McGowan's book that preceded this was The Adaptability Challenge. And so it really talked about that as a super skill for the pace of change that we all experience. Right. And so I think it's really, those were some of the highlights that came up from that research to do something different.
I love that. And then I know that you kind of thought a lot about like audience design, right? And how does that fit into this conversation? Can you share a little bit about that term, what that means in this case, and like how you use that as a lens as you built this out?
Yeah, so audience design actually comes from sociolinguistics, and it's like back in the 80s from Alan Bell, and it's the idea that linguistic style, so that's actually my academic background is applied linguistics, your style can change so that your audience finds relevance, right, and relationship with you. And so it is a like intentional thing that you do. We see it sometimes in code switching, right? We see it sometimes when you are all of a sudden like your kids come in the door and you talk to your kids in a different way. That's audience design. And then you like put your professional, Zoom background back on and you speak to your audience there. And so audience design in this case is twofold. One, who are the many audiences that performance and skill are relevant to? It's our employees, right? So what is it about an employee experience that needs to be built into this so that it's less top down, as I explained, than we usually see, right? Another audience are our leaders. So how is it that a solution that we come up with is relevant, meaningful, can grow with the leaders of this organization as they expect to scale? And very importantly, in this context where it is client related, right? All of our service, the bottom line, so to speak, is based on the happiness of our clients. How can we position this framework in a useful and distinguishing way to our client audience such that they see this as a unique and distinguishing feature that's not like every other, software agency.
Yeah. And that's where I think things always get challenging. I know that's the challenge we have, that we're like, yeah, we're a recruiting firm, but like, we're also kind of therapists and we're also project managers. And we're actually we want you to feel seen. And some of those, like speaking to our audience, how they're going to feel after an interaction can always be a little bit tricky to define, and then like get out into the world when you're also, trying to talk about the work and the outcomes of what that project's going to look like.
Yeah, it's such an interesting challenge for translation, right? We're all speaking the same language, but we're also not speaking the same language at all.
Yeah, and that's where your background is so fascinating here. I love the term all experience is experience, and that just comes so relevant here, right? That some of the biggest core solutions that you're finding to solving this like really messy people product performance challenge have come from linguistics, right? And figuring out what are those different pieces. So I love that. So I'd love if you could get a little bit into like the nerdy, wordy side of something like adaptability. You mentioned like that's a critical piece of that. How are you thinking about like measuring that? How are you like identifying it, scoring? Like what do some of those different pieces look like more tactically?
Yeah, so defining it is, critical to begin with. And so we've done some really interesting exercises in defining and giving examples of adaptability. So in our context, when working with many different clients, what does it mean to be adaptable? Adapting to people's styles. So our clients' styles, right? Maybe there is a super fast-paced style, and some of our team members want to be really careful and meticulous and thoughtful because it's something so new and cutting edge. So we must be adaptable in that way to their style and their pace. Let's say it's a project management style. Let's say somebody really wants to be agile, but there are team members or there's a use case that maybe calls for something, let's say a little bit different, or the dependencies are so great that you can't actually be agile and you have to be a little bit more waterfall. So how is it that then we build up this competency of being adaptable to those frameworks and those engagement, practices, right? And sometimes it could be in the materials and the tools that we have. I think a lot of folks, as you expand in your own professional journey, you have a lot in your toolkit, and you might rely on something because you're like, oh, this worked for me really well in some other context. I'm going to use it here. Well, the rest of the team or your client might not like that tool. Maybe they just don't like that thing that they see. So how can you be adaptable and practice that, but also still engage in a very high consultancy, high value way without delaying a whole time, right? Like we can't explore forever with these clients, or they're going to get upset that, your bill is super high and you haven't actually delivered anything, right? So those are some ways that we've been exploring adaptability. And your other question about being able to measure it then is we're doing it on, I would call it like 3 pillars, so to speak. What is the self-evaluation? I think that's super important and often gets undervalued. There's so much research on the power of self-evaluation, even if it's inaccurate compared to what others think. The practice alone is so rich in being able to self-reflect and then articulate what you came out with, right? So there's a self-evaluation component. I think there's a peer evaluation, so your immediate peers, obviously the client evaluation on it also. And so we do ask our clients, right? How adaptable were they to your needs, your requirements, your tools, et cetera, right? And so those are the 3 approaches that we have right now for measuring something as squishy as adaptability.
Yeah, I love the whole circle side of that. Can you talk to me a little bit about, that self piece? I love that you mentioned like even just the practice alone. And I'm intrigued on one side by, I feel like self-evaluation, it can be so tricky to put numbers to because we all think differently. So many of us, score ourselves higher when it's not reality and kind of learn outside of that. I found as a manager, it's really great to run through with my team. Like, so you're vetting yourself here, but I'm actually seeing you here. Let's talk about what those examples are to like build some reality. But that, and then like also just that practice of like articulating it. I'd love to learn a little bit more from you there.
Yeah. So 2 things you just mentioned. One was a number, right? Which is an attempt to be objective, right? But all research shows going back to linguistics also, we all have an impose embedded meaning on something, right? So when there is that rating system, to define that rating system and at least give some reference to what those scores mean. We actually use a 0 in our system, and the 0 is to highlight either I have not had a chance to demonstrate this, right? Because we're client driven. So maybe my projects have just not, I haven't been able to show you this thing that I've actually done so many other places, right? But that 0 is a way, it's not perfect, but it's a way to indicate I haven't had a chance to do it in this context yet, right? And then we do 1 through 5, right? And so there's, there's a lot of research on how big or small your rating scale should be. And, 5 is a relatively standard. We're big fans of, odd numbers because it forces you to make a decision. So
we use a 3-point scale on our like initial scoring, and it's so hard to like get yourself away from like 2.5.
Yeah, exactly. And so defining what, a 1 and what a 5 means, even though it's probably imperfect, there's something there to start with, seeing that self-evaluation of where does someone rank themselves. And in our context, we leave an open field for every single rated score. We don't believe that the number alone is enough, though if someone doesn't have a whole lot to say about it right now, that's okay. We're trying to socialize everyone to think more deeply about what that score means for them and why. What evidence do they have? What is the background? And so just inviting them alone to start to articulate that goes to the point that you made of, as a manager, I see you here, but I would rate you here. And the value in what you described was, now let's have a conversation about it, right? So let's make meaning together. Let's co-create the meaning of how you understand your performance, how I see your performance, and then what will we do to kind of get you to the next level?
Yeah. And like, what are those? Oh, I love that. Yeah. What are those expectations look like? Okay. Yeah. So using this as like a not end all be all, I think I love putting things to metrics because it reduces bias, but it also gives this opportunity to like take the humanity out. How often do you find that like those open text fields, as you're like kind of socializing that in, are those used often?
Right now we're in really early, like first stages, and yes, they're used very often. So what I see from that is that people are really hungry to talk about why and where they stand. So there is a strong appetite for people to give nuance and articulate it, even if it's, I'm not sure why I gave myself a 3 here, but I feel like there's this open invitation and people are taking it, which there are a lot of, I think, assumptions and stereotypes of software engineers. And I am happy to report in this context, we have some really amazing thinkers that want to talk about the nuance and want to articulate this unique opportunity for them to self-evaluate.
Yeah. And I'm finding that that is happening so many times in these, I run hiring workshops and chat with founders. And it's so interesting to look around the room and have them kind of all sit and think like, what does adaptability look like? What does ambition look like in my business? And you can see the wheels spinning, there's a lot going on in their mind, and you're realizing, oh, you haven't held the space to have this conversation yet.
Exactly.
Because you're so busy doing all these other pieces that I find that's like the biggest value is holding that space and then letting them look around in community to be like, oh, none of us have held the space to have this before. So that's super intriguing to hear that on the candidate, on like your internal employee side, you're noticing there's almost this like real big desire that's been pent up without realizing it. So like, oh my gosh, finally we get to hold some space and think about these like intangible concepts that are actually fairly tangible when we take the time to think about them.
Something I will add to that is we have a pretty strong practice internally of using team members in the hiring process as interviewers. And so they have a rubric where they have been not only socialized to, maybe check some things off the list, but have an open dialogue with a potential candidate. And I think that's quite unique because in a lot of organizations, interviews are sort of withheld to a certain rank and a certain profile, right? So you don't get a lot of folks engaged in that. And it's pretty normal here at Codingscape to distribute that. On the one hand, we're a startup and we are very lean in our management. There are very few management roles. And so it equalizes that in a way. But on the other hand, it exposes folks to start thinking about that for others and for themselves. And so it's super unique and interesting to see that conversation emerge. And like you said, like people are taking advantage of those open fields, those open text fields. We're not seeing a lot of like, just the number and let's move on. That may change in a little bit as they get more used to it, right? Who knows? The future remains to be seen, but it's exciting and intriguing right now.
Yeah, that's definitely more often than I was expecting. So that's so cool to learn. And then something we find for, engaging teammates and peers into a conversation like this is empowering them with what are you looking for? What is that unique lens that you bring? And what power do you have? I find that so often colleagues get, they kind of get pulled into interviews without knowing their power. That I find it so valuable to say like, great, if this person's going to be kind of an asshole, like that's important that you flag too, right? Because this person's joining your team and you do have some of that power, but it doesn't, we're looking at it as a full body of work. So I love that you're kind of thinking like, here's your rubric, right? These are the things that you're vetting for. I think that's definitely in best practice that we look at as well. Well, I could talk to you for days and days, Lauren, but let's wrap up here. Your time is so valuable and I appreciate your spending it so candidly with us here. To kind of move toward the end, I'm curious, like what makes you a great teammate?
I'd say it's two things. One is certainly, I talked about empathy before and just my, diverse background and curiosity in different spaces brings me to connect with people in a different way. And I'm super aware of that as a superpower, but have also invested a lot in validating that from others, like asking them, what is it that makes an interaction with me unique? Like I've done that work. And so it's something that I identify and it's something that has been validated by my team members. I think another superpower of being a great team member, at least in the context that I have had, is really approaching something with a beginner's mindset. I'm here first to understand, like, who are you as people? Who is it that we are working with? What is this project that we're working on? And really approaching it not as an expert myself. I think some of that also comes from my diverse background. I've, sort of, some people would say career ladder hopped or, evolved I'm very proud of my nonlinear trajectory, right?
Yes.
That means that by default, I can't have exceptional deep expertise in just one thing, right? So it would be phony for me to pretend that I'm like the know-it-all on this whole thing, right? So I try, to approach really with a beginner's mindset, and I find that really, really helpful because I get to learn from other people.
Wow, what a phenomenal human you are, Lauren. Like you have this like immense product, people, performance, leadership experience, and you're still coming at every interaction as like, who are you as a human first before you can get anywhere, which is probably how you've gotten where you are. So I'm so appreciative to you just for existing, for sharing your story with me, with us in general. Our listeners, I'm sure, are going to be feeling the exact same way. Is there a way that they can get in touch with you to kind of like follow your journey? Where are you writing? Where are you putting your thoughts into the world?
Yeah, I'm mostly on LinkedIn these days. We don't have to get into the politics of other social media channels at the moment, but that's, I think, where I'm most active. And you'll see, more publishing and microblogging and things always funneled and amplified there.
Okay, beautiful. Great. Well, we'll have very detailed show notes with all sorts of books and reading opportunities for listeners and viewers. So thanks, Lauren. Really appreciate you. Hope y'all as listeners did as well. And we'll see you all next time.
Awesome.